If Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War was the entry that I got the most hyped up on in my journey within the franchise, Fire Emblem Thracia 776, the series' 5th installment, was the one I had heard the least about. Everyone always had something to say about every single entry, for better or worse, except this one. Why? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It was a a Super Famicom game, last time I can make that joke, let me have it, released in 1999, specifically in a Nintendo Power Flash cart that year. You know, the Japan-only kiosk you could find in stores where you'd be able to download games onto flash memory cartridges. Later, the game would get a proper cartridge in the following year 2000, but either way, brother. What? A 1999 Super Famicom flash cart and a 2000 Super Famicom cartridge? Whatever you say, Kaga. For the last time at that, because as many of you know, this ended up being the original series creators' last Fire Emblem game. Because of all of this, I only started hearing anything about it once I had gotten more into the series and began chatting with longtime veterans. It's garnered a bit of a cult following over the years, especially with the franchise's increase in popularity. And amidst the chatter, one sentiment was louder than any other. The game in question is hard. Maybe even the hardest in the entire series. While that consensus was a little worrying for a time, the closer I got to playing it, those fears turned into excitement. I love this series, and its inherent challenge is a big part of that affection. And this game's rise in difficulty stemmed from the notion that it was developed with those who've at least played Genealogy in mind. And while it's unfortunately a rare trend, I love it when sequels balance their difficulty around the assumption that this isn't the player's first rodeo. This was looking to be a niche game made for series veterans serving to flesh out a world and story I had already loved. I'm the exact right kind of player for this game, and after playing it, we've got a lot to talk about. What do you say we jump back into Yggdrasil and see what the heck's going on? And when I say jump back into Yggdrasil, I'm referring to the fact that this game is a midquel to Genealogy. That game's story was split into 2 parts, with Thracia 776 being right in between them. That said, it's impossible to talk about the story without giving away major plot beats from Genealogy, so if you haven't played that game yet, please use the timestamp you see on screen to skip ahead to my gameplay analysis. I won't be spoiling this game, but I will be spoiling that one. You good? Alright, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get into it. Immediately after my heart was ripped into 2 and the Granville Empire took over everything at the family barbecue, we're brought over to the Thracian Peninsula. Following what the game dubs as the Yi Desert Massacre, both Prince Quan and Ethelyn have been murdered, and Leonster has fallen soon afterwards, quickly going under control of the Granville Empire in their conquest to bring all of Yggdrasil under their sole rule. Thankfully, Finn was left to watch or relieve Quan and Ethelyn's son, as well as his own daughter Nana. So this game makes a canon that he got together with Lachesis, and I think that's a cute pairing. Kinda suboptimal for gameplay reasons, neither Nana nor Diarmuid can inherit Finn's lances, but I digress. The 3 of them managed to escape, and after hiding with a group of rebels for a time, Nana and another one of the rebels' kids, Marita, get kidnapped. This gives Leif the push he needs to make his move, as he believes it's time for him to reclaim his home and do his part to bring the new dark ages of Yggdrasil to a long overdue end. And really? That's about the gist of it. We're back to the typical Fire Emblem narrative of reclaiming the main lord's home, only this time, we were there for what's essentially the prologue to this game and know where it inevitably leads. Back in the very first installment, we'd hear tales of the tragic end that befell Marth's dad, but it was nothing more than background information for the characters and story we actually care about. Seeing that typical, the main character's dad always dies set up firsthand in Genealogy, along with a front row seat to the fall of the continent itself, gave this story's second generation so much more weight, with Thracia's tale enjoying those benefits as well. I know how hopeless this time period is because I watched it all go down in the game prior, and being able to see it in further detail was intriguing all on its own. With this in mind, I'm happy to report that this game does just about everything you could want with this time frame. We see how it affected normal civilians, got a more intimate look at the leaders in other nations, not just Thracia, and overall got to be more in-depth with a politically tense climate. Genealogy was great at conveying the scale of this war, but it's nice to see it at a more personal level while still being able to feel the sheer scope of it all. This is great storytelling, and I appreciate that it maintains its focus on being a midquel without trying to retcon anything or switch things up on the player. We ultimately know how this story ends, but the game allows that knowledge to be maintained in order to appreciate character decisions more. more. It's like if you were to replay a game on its own or re-experience a story of any kind. The finer details jump out at you more, and along with a different perspective, it's super enjoyable because of everything I know. Yet even still, the game's able to create tension and situations where I fear for many of the characters' well-being. And this game already has permadeath. Just like in the other half of the duology, it really feels like you're in a war with the militia constantly on your ass, enemy formations and strength causing you to feel like you're in way over your head, and political tensions on every front. With the Empire in control, there are a lot less conflicting sides since a part of their plan at this point was to snuff out anyone who'd stand against them, but of course there are still those looking out for themselves, allies supporting the rebellion, and so many more gray areas the game explores. I especially loved getting more insight from those within the Granville Empire itself, with many being unaware of the Lopchian mages and their ulterior motives. One of the main themes with genealogy was exploring how everyone has a reason for their actions and can't always be put in a box as a villain who's completely evil. And with this game giving us a closer look, it's clear that this applies even within the army that, for all intents and purposes, is really easy to view as completely evil. Sometimes it's easy to forget that not every character knows everything we, the omniscient audience, are aware of. So it's cool to see characters reach revelations we were waiting for them to catch on to, and the great dialogue exchanges these realizations bring with them. Of course, there are still those mustache-twirling villains, and the main one in particular forged a really great rivalry between himself and Leaf. One that spanned across the entire game and was super cool to see through until the end. So on all fronts when it comes to antagonists, villains, and opposing forces, this game's got you covered as well, which was really cool to see. In fact, let's go ahead and get more into the characters, because once again, despite the genius world building and fleshed out setting all being handled expertly, the core of this story still lies with the characters, as I believe it should. And after genealogy was a lot text heavier than your traditional Fire Emblem games, a part of me was worried that we'd lessen the dialogue to a degree where the characters couldn't be as fleshed out as they were there. Thankfully, a balance has been struck, allowing for that more fluid pacing in the more standard entries, with ample characterization to make this cast as great as the creative team would naturally want them to be. Leading the pack this time around is my boy Leaf. He was already one of my favorites in genealogy, but now that he's been fleshed out even further, Yggdrasil is officially 3 for 3 regarding baller protagonists, which is funny because, like with the narrative itself, his story isn't anything new. He's a lord whose father has been killed in an ongoing war, forcing him to grow up and be the leader his kingdom needs him to be. But just like with Seliph, it's because we saw all of this happen firsthand and got so invested in the war personally that his story resonates deeper than it would already. Moreover, the dialogue is well written once again, at least if this excellent fan translation is anything to go by, link in the description, and there's a lot more of it to go off of. This allowed me to see the way he carries himself while witnessing his growth on a more personal level, and more than any other typical Fire Emblem protagonist so far, I really felt the weight of this forced upon responsibility and the urgency he needed to become a proper leader. He's also the most grounded of the Yggdrasil protagonists, one of the most grounded across the series at that. His moments of immaturity and brashness felt like understandable leaks of a child who's still mourning his home and family, trying to mask himself as the stoic, brave leader everyone wants. And when he does finally get to that point and we watch him right wrongs we know happened because of his inexperience, it's earned and satisfying to see. He's a phenomenal main character, with the rest of the cast faring pretty damn well too. My favorite this time around being Merida. She starts off getting kidnapped and is even forced to be a Lopchian pawn, but once she finally breaks free and refuses to let these things define her, she comes into her own and shines brighter than anyone else, especially seeing how this is another entry that's fantastic at weaving the story and gameplay together. Her becoming a beast of a unit felt as good as it did because it perfectly lined up with her character progression. She said she wanted to be better, and I saw her become better from multiple angles, even surpassing her mother, who was already a suspiciously cracked unit to start with. You may switch your class around every other entry or so, but I know a Jagan when I see one. You can't fool me. As for other standouts, once again, there are so many. Finn, Nana, Asbel, Orson, Halvin, Tina, Lithis, Ivel, Olwyn, and Shiva were the best in my eyes, along with some of my favorite second generation characters who showed up as well. Once again, I'm satisfied on all fronts, and like I've brought up a bunch already, how the gameplay heightens Thracia's storytelling prowess continues to be one of its greatest strengths and something I yearn for. But before we get into all of that, we should probably get more into the gameplay itself. There isn't too much I feel needs to be said regarding any groundwork. A lot of what made those older titles what they were remain true. Turn-based strategy, limited movement, specific class niches, pre-battle preparation, yada yada yada. Fire Emblem really isn't that hard to grasp, so aside from a few minor, more in-depth tweaks, along with genealogy's weapon triangle becoming a series mainstay, we're gonna focus on the new, more apparent features. For starters, this game introduced rescuing, where if one unit has the strength to pick up another, they'll be able to carry them at the cost of some reduced stats. items. While easy to misuse, this can pave the way for some great movement options, especially when it comes to Cavaliers and Flyers. Oh yeah, and speaking of mounted units, dismounting is back. Yay. I mistakenly thought that this was a Mystery of the Emblem exclusive mechanic, but I guess you could technically still do it in Genealogy. You'd just be a sociopath if you did. Anyway, I'll admit that it's a lot better implemented here, but I still don't like it. On the one hand, the game's much better about determining who will do what, mounted or on foot, with a lot more variety, most likely because of the new weapon triangle. But on the other hand, it's still annoying for mounting units to lose this perk indoors. The end of the game mostly takes place indoors, including the final map, which was super cool to see, and you can't mount or dismount on the preparations menu to better prepare yourself. So yes, there were improvements, but this remained an eye roller to see come back. At least this time I know it'll be the last instance where it's forced, unless it's in Radiant Dawn, which is still the only one I haven't played. Fingers crossed. Regardless, units and their varied weapon utility were very welcome factors in a game where resource management is a more crucial necessity than ever. If you don't think about how often you're using your gear and even some items like door keys in particular, I can see some people possibly getting stuck. I've never been so stressed about door keys as I was playing this game, and with them being as important as they are, it blows my mind that they aren't something you can just buy in the default store. They may sound a bit broken to some, but given how there are a bunch of chapters where you have to unlock doors to progress, running out of them, lockpicks, or the thieves who are able to use said lockpicks is quite possibly a soft lock, and that's kinda crazy to say. Besides, having them as a purchasable constant wouldn't even be that game breaking. After all, even with access to base weapons in the battle preparation armory, you'll be struggling to completely outfit your units thanks to the driest economy this series has ever seen before or since. Your ass is gonna be broke. I was debating on begging the enemies for some spare change. There will never be a house that gives you money or any NPC that offers you spoils of war because, again, given the game's time frame, everybody's struggling. So then, Mr. Evolution, how do you replenish resources? Well, there are two primary options. The first being the arena, the original style of arena. Sit down, Genealogy fans. And just like the original style so far, I don't really care for it. I get that it's supposed to be risky, but some of the enemies are way too strong for where you are in the game, and in a way that doesn't make any sense. It feels too random, and I would have liked some kind of gradual increase like Genealogy had while still maintaining that uncertainty and risk. On top of this, you don't even get to bring in your equipped weapons, so this randomness on top of the standard rental gear you're given just makes the arena fail to be worth the wager until you're at a point where you don't even need the extra money. All of this is why I tend to lean towards the other way of replenishing resources and potentially making cash, the new capture mechanic. You'll enter combat as normal, but with reduced stats because you aren't going for a kill, but a knockout. Then, when you've taken the enemy, you can rob them of literally everything they're holding and release them once you're done, which is just so much fun. This even works on bosses should your units have the strength to pick them up. So if you see a cool piece of gear, this along with Thieves' stealing capabilities can allow you to get your hands on some great stuff if you're willing to take the risk. You'll want to get into the habit of doing this as early as possible because it's an invaluable mechanic you'll need to master. Then again, saying that you'll be mastering it might be a stretch because no matter what, Thracia is not messing around. Along with some very hard enemies and testing map layouts, the rumors are true, Fire Emblem Thracia 776 is hard. Actually, after playing it myself, that's an understatement. Fire Emblem Thracia 776 is hard! Nothing short of the toughest game in the series, and there ain't no difficulty options to lessen the pain. You will be playing Thracia as intended, and you will be struggling for a good long while. Granted, this makes sense from a narrative standpoint. Leif and his army are on the run, the Empire is at its strongest, and the land being torn apart by a holy war of sorts means that, yeah, you're gonna have the worst dealt hand. In that sense, the high level of challenge is inherently fascinating to experience, being an inspired method to have the gameplay and story work together to heighten the overall experience. But it is worth dissecting if the game took too much of its given inch, because whether this was intentional or not, at the end of the day, the game's gotta be satisfying to play. That being said, whoo boy, put on that Ike cosplay and prepare yourself because everything you can do, the enemy can do too. I repeat, everything you can do, the enemy can do too. You've got an overpowered skill, someone on the opposite side's gonna have it later. Vulneraries heal you completely this time around? That's cute. They do the same for the enemies, including bosses. You can capture and completely strip an enemy unit. Guess who can do the same to you? Remember that you can just capture a healer without having to engage in combat too, because your opponents won't be shy about that either. Oh, and silly me, I forgot a few of the new mechanics, and it looks like I happen to save the best for last. First, let's talk about that new fatigue stat. Repeated use of a unit will raise this counter, and once it exceeds the character's max HP, you can't use them in the next battle. Sorry, they're tired. Persona 3, is that you? How much HP do healers have again? And then there's this little fucker. A sound that would single-handedly either raise my spirit or break it. If a unit gets this, after their turn is over, they get another one. No, really, they just get to go again. The chance of this happening is determined by how many movement stars they have, and it's a very low possibility, but no matter what, this always makes for a crazy surprise. Then, and then, of all the games to do it, who are we kidding? Of course, this is the one that introduced Fog of War. Or I guess a more appropriate name is Darkness of War, because all of these maps take place at night and vision is obscured by darkness. But somehow these made me miss Fog of War, because the darkness covers everything from your enemies to the freaking map layout. In fact, if you happen to run into an enemy, your movement is halted and your turn is forfeit, since I guess they were taken by surprise. Of course, the enemies can see perfectly fine and get to attack should they run into you, but I guess Leaf just forgot to grab his pack of night vision goggles amidst the chaos. These are the worst part of the game, and while almost all of them are optional maps, almost all of them, even that ruins the manner in which this game approaches optional maps at all. Guidance chapters, as they were, are extra missions you get by fulfilling specific requirements, and they're a very clever idea that fits perfectly into the linear style of progression. You're able to get more opportunities at experience along with other limited resources, and there's secrets to go for that can incentivize replays. I love this concept, but future games do them so much better solely because 99% of them here are these stupid darkness maps. Getting one almost always results in the feeling of regret instead of accomplishment. Why would I voluntarily sign up for another darkness chapter? These suck and come off like elaborate beginner's traps. Because really, how are you supposed to know what's going on without prior knowledge or by way of using a guide? Yes, there are items that help, but never ones that alleviate their tedium and frustration altogether. I guess the enemies just had to get one unfair advantage, huh? Ballistae weren't enough, am I right, guys? Oh, hey, there's another one. And another one. And another, and another, and another? Good lord, can we stop with the ballista spam? Seriously, it's worse here than ever. If you were able to tolerate them before, then Thracia will be the game that teaches you to hate those damn sniper attacks. Only getting more plentiful and frustrating the further you get into the game. All the way until the end game, as a matter of fact. Which, well, considering everything up until that point, goes about how you'd expect it to. Which, bluntly put, is fucking ridiculous! Jesus Christ, Kaga, are you good? What did I do? I'm importing your shitty games just to show my love and support, and this is how you treat me? Because seriously, what's up with the fucking ballista spam? They are everywhere. Everywhere! And it's impossible to safely go for one because 9 times out of every 10 ballista bastards, there's another one to cover its weak points. Yeah, the hit rate is low, but with how many of these damn things there are everywhere, it feels like I'm getting hit by them all of the time because they're being used all of the time. Look at this shit. I can't make this up. There are 5 ballistae camped next to each other, one of them being stronger than normal, with 2 high priests also wielding sniping magic, and a healer who can put you to sleep at infinite range. Are you fucking delusional? This is too much! And you know what? I think we moved on too quickly because seriously, how about those goddamn darkness chapters? No way to see the map here, folks. Use your torches or get fucked. Can you take me out to dinner first? And no, my game isn't glitching. This is really all some of these chapters show you on the preparations menu. Yeah, it's funny for like 2 seconds, but when I have literally zero idea of who would work best for a map, it's just a big old waste of my time to deploy, see that they were the wrong choice, and restart my game to pick who I actually need. Laugh it up, asshole. This shit is dumb and you all know it. Then we are 5 games in and I still can't just choose where I deploy my characters? For God's sake, just show me where they're gonna be and let me control my positioning. Especially because towards the end of the game, it starts getting really comfortable splitting your deployed characters up. And the only way to be able to divide them into the specific areas you want is to keep count of every character in the queue, as their number slot is the only way to control where they end up. Which even then is already hard to control because where they are on your deployment list is determined by who you did and didn't use in the chapter previously. For fuck's sake, just let me pick where they go. It can't be that hard to program, can it? And you've got to be shitting my dick, because ain't no way we're still doing motherfucking ambush spawns. Are we? In this game? Suck my dick! Get on your knees and suck! Do it! I'm okay. I'm okay. Every horror story you've heard about this game's merciless challenge level is true. In fact, I was told very adamantly by a few friends that it was highly recommended for me to use a guide. If you know me, however, you know that I immediately rolled my eyes at this and didn't listen, because I've always been someone who pushed away from the idea of following a walkthrough on your first playthrough, with very extreme exceptions. I'll go more into this little tangent later, but I stuck to my guns and played the game completely blind. With the exception of chapter 22 after a bunch of failed attempts. I was stuck there for so long and I needed some idea of how to beat it. But I say all of this to reinforce the common consensus of Thracia's relentless difficulty. And honestly, that alone makes it very hard to recommend. Heck, I could even see those who do give it a shot possibly drop it because of its sheer insanity. I do think that in a few areas, Thracia takes its intentionally higher than average challenge a bit too far for the wrong reasons. Try to defend darkness maps, ballista spam, and ambush spawns all you want, but these, among my other grievances, really knock down a lot of the game's factors that otherwise would be among the best in the series. In particular, I'm referring to this game's map design, because when you look past these incredibly frustrating features the game loves to use more and more the further you get, the overall map design is, quite frankly, phenomenal. Even with the aspects that drag them down, I'd still put it in the top 5 for this category specifically. In every single mission, you're constantly pushed to move forward, with the game promoting being aggressive. You're pushed into making crazy plays, especially if you want to get those juicy rewards in order to ease the suffering, and I find that much more investing than being able to turtle all the time. I've got to split some characters off, go for multiple objectives, and make sure I'm making some progress to the main goal. This is exactly the kind of engagement I want in the series missions. There are also plenty of secrets within these maps that reward curiosity in those paying attention, with strategic play getting acknowledged as well due to many maps having multiple ways to beat them. Not to mention, they really mix up your objectives this time around. The majority of your goals are to still seize a tile, that of which failing to grow stale thanks to the maps on their own, but this game also introduced both escape and defense chapters, two of my favorite map objectives across the entire franchise, and they're already fantastic. Escape maps don't just involve escaping with your lord, but with everyone. In fact, Leaf has to be the last one to leave in order to do these missions properly, as escaping with Leaf will cause the chapter to end and everyone left behind will be kidnapped, only rescuable towards the end of the game. And defense maps are just inherently awesome, forcing you to engage with enemies constantly pushing towards your protected area. Having to plug choke points, balancing that with offensive plays, and going for those rewards always tempting you to be a little silly. These are always so hard, but just as consistently fun. I shouldn't be surprised that this was the game to bring them in. So yes, the game's challenge factor does play a hand in this game's map's enjoyability. Honestly, they probably wouldn't be as good if it weren't for the inherent difficulty. Like I said with Genealogy, when that game started getting really hard, it pushed me to come up with strategies I had never even thought of before. But here, that feeling was felt throughout the entire game, that of which being even greater due to the new mechanics. There is a lot of BS in Thracia, but learning how to circumvent it all, and furthermore, learning how to make it work for you, is a major part of the gameplay loop. And you do this by strategizing harder than you've ever strategized before, making for one of the most gratifying and rewarding tactics games to outsmart. Optimizing movement, capturing units, managing your strict as hell resources, and being wise with your finances all feel so good because you navigate through these restrictions in an already tough as nails game. When it gives you those moments of levity, you take that inch and give yourself a mile, to the point where when it comes back around trying to knock you down a peg, you're able to prepare for it. Even when I did get to those moments of inevitable loss, it felt like an intentional part of the experience, working to help craft my own narrative. A sentiment these early games excel in so well that I can't seem to be able to shut up about it. Unlike Genealogy with its battle saves, I had to play with permadeath in mind once more, relearning to roll with the punches and lose some good units. It was brutal, but this game's challenge, as high as it may be, felt more satisfying to overcome than it didn't, even with the aforementioned BS. Because while Thracia is brutal, it gives you everything you need to win. You're bound to get into a flow state a dozen or so chapters in, and after a while, you may not immediately notice it, but you'll be losing fewer characters, getting less pressed about how much you're using certain weapons, not worrying about who's getting fatigued because of the other great units just itching to get back into the fray. This game actually pushed me to use more of my units than I ever would have because of fatigue, and I enjoyed the change of pace, even as someone who tends to find a core team and primarily stick with them. As a result, I found great units in unexpected places, and against all odds, fatigue ended up being a pretty ingenious, productive mechanic I wouldn't mind showing up in a future game's hard mode or some kind of adjacent option. There's clearly something to be said about how hard the game is, but even more in how much your skill as a player and your unit's capabilities will all grow exponentially the more you play. After all, this is Kaga Emblem. And as we know, while these games can be silly, you can be silly right back with all the goofy mechanics we've discussed and some great tools just waiting for you to find them. Everything the enemies can do, you can do too, and it feels real good whipping out the frustrating shit they pulled on you right back onto them. Ridiculous weapons, stat increasing items, rare movement increases upon level ups, character skills, and character classes being super capable on the whole this time around. Every type of unit has brought their A game, even classes I didn't ever think too highly of, with major shoutouts to my GOATs, the healers, sweeping it up once again. Nana is so good this time around, with her Earth Sword seeing a hell of a glow up, and her mounted perks coming in clutch. Sapphire kept some of the most useful staves all to herself, like the glorious hammer, which worked on both weapons and staves, and my GOAT, Tina. My GOAT? Tina. Not only does she have hella movement stars to get multiple turns often, but she comes with a freaking thief staff. Steal any item from an enemy with lower magic, infinite range. Oh, this is awesome. They got so creative with what healers can do this time around. Every class, really. With all of these cracked units, tough as nails enemies, and truly inspired map design to host these ludicrous battles, this game leans as deeply into Kaga Emblem's silliness as it does Kaga Emblem difficulty, becoming an experience as intentional and tightly knit as it is wild and chaotic. The brutality of it all was frustrating in some instances, but when I beat the game, I felt like I had achieved something remarkable. Because while the game does manage to have something of a difficulty curve, it's tough as nails from beginning to end. Even when you get a good groove going, Thracia will still find its ways to keep your confidence in check, especially as someone who decided to go into this completely blind. An achievement I'm glad I was able to obtain, but like I said, I get why people would tell you not to do this, at least for this entry. There are a lot of evil surprises beyond dumbass ambush spawns, and even some critical story beats you can straight up miss out on. Not to mention, with money being as tight as it is, it's not impossible to get screwed out of having enough door keys to progress, let alone some of the other tools meant to circumvent these limitations. It's a game that's unsympathetic to those who dare to rise up to the task, and there really is something to be said about how hard it can be to recommend it to others, let alone having those same people stick with it. But all of that being said, this is exactly what Thracia was going for from the jump. And in a world where it feels like every game has to bend over backwards for the player's convenience, and in my opinion, having a lot of games' accessibility options compromise game design as a whole, it's refreshing to play something like this where you have to bend to the will of the game itself. This is Yggdrasil in its darkest period, Leaf at his lowest. You both have to claw your way out of the darkness and overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. And on that road to salvation, yeah, there are going to be some prizes to pay, sacrifices to be made, surprises you could never see coming. Maybe even a loose end or two because you didn't know how to wrap it up or couldn't spare to make the detour. These are the choices you'll have to make, the struggle the game wants you to undergo, and why I'd ultimately still push back on using a guide in your first playthrough. You are supposed to struggle, and that aside, Fire Emblem was never a series about getting everything done perfectly on a first run, a sentiment made abundantly clear from the very beginning of the series. Classic Emblem, Kaga Emblem. And that's why I'd ultimately define this game as Kaga's swan song. Not just because it's the last Fire Emblem game pioneered by the series creator, but because it embodies everything that made his titles in particular what they were. You're not gonna see everything, and that's okay. Good stuff may be missed, and the harsh level of difficulty will test your patience like you wouldn't believe. But above everything, your strategy is the key to victory. Planning, adapting, risks, calculations, and calculated risks are all indispensable tools. And when that seemingly impossible victory is reached, it'll feel that much better because it was something you genuinely earned. something both you and the characters will have struggled to obtain, with the overall experience and how it meshes all of its aspects together strengthening the notion. Amidst the frustration, the most frustrating part will be the impossibility to see this game as anything less than intelligently put together, because it is. Coupled with greater visuals and the already great looking genealogy and another excellent soundtrack that evolves in scope as you progress, even being dynamic in some instances according to gameplay developments, Fire Emblem Thracia 776 is an annoyingly genius tactical RPG. It's a game that is smarter than I am, made for someone like me, anticipating how I'd react to certain things and forcing me to switch my mindset, adapt my playstyle, and earn that victory through an evolution of my own skill set. It's a game for the tactical enthusiast, so if you are a fan and have played Genealogy, then you owe it to yourself to check this one out. It's cruel and occasionally aggravating, but it's also fair, empowering, eye-opening, creative, and fulfilling. A perfect showcase of why I love this series as much as I do. And it's because of all of this that it's another one of my personal favorites and an excellent cap to the fantastic Super Famicom era. It went down swinging, but I wouldn't have wanted Kaga Emblem to close out in any other way.